Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our Jitterbit webinar, Mastering Omnichannel Commerce. I'm going to be hosting this along with a couple other people from Jitterbit. But before we get started, just want a friendly reminder, we are going to have a Q&A session at the end of this webinar. So to do that, to ask questions, simply use the control panel on the bottom of your screen. There's a Q&A box. Click that and go ahead and ask your questions. We're also going to be sending out a recording of this, so you can have that to review as well. And if there's any questions that we didn't get to, or if you think of them after the webinar, please feel free to reach out to us. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Ron. Ron?
Thanks, David. So today, we've got our panel here, and we're going to do a couple quick intros for about 5 minutes, just giving everybody's background on the panel. Then we're going to go into a Q&A session that I'm going to lead, which is about 4 key questions we think are important around omnichannel. And then finally, we're going to go to the attendance and open it up for Q&A. So that's the plan today for the agenda. So let's get going on the introductions. Paul Forno, maybe you can kick it off and tell us a little bit about yourself and your background at Deloitte.
Sure. Thanks for that, Ron. My name is Paul Forno. I'm a leader in the commerce practice, help to run the practice. It's the largest commerce practice globally. We help some of the biggest brands out there. I've sat on the advisory board of every major e-commerce player in the enterprise, and I'm looking forward to having this discussion today.
Thanks, Paul. Paul Drecksler?
Hey, everybody. I'm Paul Drecksler. Most recently, I run an e-commerce newsletter called Shopifreaks, where I curate the most important news for our industry. But before that, the reason I started the newsletter is for the past going on 2 decades. I've worked with online businesses, mostly small businesses, which is an interesting perspective to bring to the table alongside these guys who work with enterprise. And about 10 years ago, I got really heavy into e-commerce and haven't looked back.
Great. Thanks, Paul. How about you, Sean?
Yeah, so I lead retail partnerships here at Shopify. Retail at Shopify is our focus on bricks and mortar merchants. And in the Shopify world, if you're using our offline or our bricks and mortar offerings, then you're 99% of the time an omni-channel merchant using other channels on our platform. And prior to Shopify, I've worked in cloud point of sale with omni-channel as like a core focus for, I guess, about 10 years now. So,
great. Thanks. And I'm Ron Wastal. I'm the Senior Vice President of Business Development Channels and Alliances at Jitterbit. Been there about 4 years, but have a long history of working with integration companies, helping to solve the omni-channel problem, including Apptio, MuleSoft, Cast Iron, IBM, et cetera. So I think we've got a great panel here to have these discussions. And why don't I kick off the first question to the panel here? Let me take that slide away so we can just focus on the people. So first question, panel. How has the definition of omni-channel commerce evolved from your point of view? Has it expanded from your perspective, and how has it expanded? Paul Forno, do you want to take the lead on that one?
Sure. And I think first off, it's good to step back and think about historically how this fits in, because if you go back in history, this is not a new problem. It's just become more complex. Because if you think going back, some of the Sears started off as a catalog company, right? And it was different. And then it evolved into stores and many different other channels selling, right? And so this is not a new problem. And when you think about this omni-channel, people sometimes forget that when some of these new channels were coming in, companies and enterprises treated them like almost like, and I'll give it a great example. There's a retailer that in the early 2000s treated their e-commerce site like store number 99099, and they literally treated it exactly like a separate store. And so what you have is this evolution of different channels, and many times it was because the technology wasn't there to tie all of these experiences together. So over time, as mobile apps, contact centers, retail stores, marketplaces, social, like there's so many opportunities out there, right? And there's also been historically a lot of debate around terminology. So over time, people have talked about multi-channel, omni-channel, and lots of times they'll get into the semantics of it to try and say it's a little bit better or not as better. And so what we at Deloitte try and say, we've got a definition that we talk about. And I'm just going to say it really quick. Omnichannel means being available at any time, anywhere, making it convenient and tailored for the customer, boosting retailer performances. And the reason I wanted to use that example is instead of trying to debate what is all the different channels, but it's all about the customer at the center.
Great. Thank you, Paul. Paul Drecksler, any thoughts around how you see the definition and how it's evolved over time?
Yeah, in the past couple of decades, I've been the first point of contact for small businesses going from brick and mortar or going from wholesale only to launching on retail and launching online rather. And what I've noticed is like the conversation used to be a lot more binary. We would talk about offline and online. But now the conversation about online has really evolved, and it's not so binary. It's a conversation about, okay, obviously we sell on the website. Do you also sell on marketplaces? If so, which marketplaces? Do you also sell on social media? Do you have an affiliate program? Do you allow other online retailers to sell your products? And if so, what's your relationship with your DTC channel versus your other? So when I talk to these companies and I talk to these brands and they say, okay, we want to go online, they really need a guide now to say it's not just as simple as putting yourself on the internet. And on the flip side of the coin, a lot of them come in and we want to be here, 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 and here. And they don't necessarily realize that each one of those channels takes dedicated resources and time and its own real strategy to find success in either one of those channels. So that's how I've seen things evolve over the years. But lastly, I think that these small business owners are also seeing that there's an expectation that they have to exist in multiple places because their customers are looking for them. So gone are the days where they can just say, well, we have the website, you gotta come into the, gone are the days where the business can tell the customer how to shop. Now the customer really wants to be in control of shopping with the brand or the retailer on the channel that is the best fit for them, the most convenient for them.
Sean, any other thoughts you'd like to share about the definition and the evolution, especially with your interesting perspective at Shopify?
Yeah, I think Paul summed up quite a bit of it there. The one thing I would add is that the solution stack has expanded quite a bit. So as we see new channels coming online, it's not just online and offline, but there's marketplaces, there's social selling, there's new channels coming in. How you facilitate those channels end to end on the value chain. So from supply side management and optimizing for each of those channels across your business and how you operationalize it has brought a whole wealth of new solutions into play. And it has made things more complex, but it has given the opportunity for a lot more efficiency when you get the right solution stack in place for your strategy.
Got it. And as I think about that, I think about how the point that was made by Paul Forno and Drecksler was these channels seem to keep morphing and evolving, right? Now you've got, I'm getting hit with messages from merchants and things like that. Chat is now coming into play. So it seems like the online definition keeps evolving and adding channels as we go here. And I've got to believe it's difficult as a merchant to figure out which online channels do you start with and how do you evolve given the rapid movement that's happening across these different channels. Let's go to kind of question number 2 that I came up with. Why would you develop an omni-channel commerce experience? What do you think the key benefits really are of going to omni-channel from a single or multi-channel thought process? Sean, do you have opinions on that?
Yeah, so from the why perspective, I can just look at what some of our best brands have done. So they've launched different D2C channels, omni-channel, different channels from the omni-channel bucket throughout the last couple of years to reach their customers. So we saw this during the pandemic. How do we, if our stores are closed, how can I reach my customers in this situation? What is a new way to allow them to shop with us? But it wasn't just Shopify e-commerce stores. It's channels like social media selling, marketplaces, and interestingly enough, even B2B aspects that are taking place on multiple channels with some of the businesses. And so the brands, and I think Paul Forno said this as part of their statement there at Deloitte, the brands are putting their customers at the center and they're launching these channels to reach them. And they do this because they want their customers to shop with them however and wherever they want. And I guess Paul touched on this as well, but like this is an expectation now across the customer base. So why develop it? Because customers are now shopping this way. I think we have a number around 75% of customers today are shopping with multiple touch points across multiple channels in the brand. So that might be looking up something online while you're doing comparative shopping in the physical environment. So it's basically becoming table stakes for the brand. Some key benefits. So, doing this puts you at a competitive advantage in the marketplace relative to your peers. If they're not taking this approach or taking advantage of it, expanded reach. So you can reach your customers across more channels. This allows for potentially more revenue. We've seen this in our numbers. So throughout the last couple of years, 190% increase in revenue on omni-channel selling versus single channel selling on the platform. That's a big, big difference. And there's higher average spend per customer. And then you're able to acquire customers. So first-time buyers in places that you couldn't before. So how are people finding your brand? Well, if you have more channels, more touch points, more potential, then you can acquire customers in different ways to the brand. And then this leans into, letting your customer find you, shop with you, wherever and whenever they want. And then ultimately that translates into a higher lifetime value of the customer. So from our stats, we're seeing a 30% increase in LTV across omni-channel shoppers versus single channel. And it's because the brands are creating a seamless buying experience across channels to better position themselves to win the market share, to earn customer loyalty, to have repeat customers, shop with them across different channels, and ultimately grow faster.
So wow, you gave a couple really good statistics there. So 75% are already starting to do omni-channel. And then I think I heard you say something like, 160% return on investment of the omni-channel experiences. Did I get that right?
No, yeah, 190% increase in revenue on omni-channel selling versus single channel. And I mean, this makes sense. If you have two different channels now that are driving revenue, as long as they're profitable channels, then you'd expect to see more revenue there. But yeah, it's pretty impactful for the business when you pick the right channel and strategically launch it in the way that makes sense for the brand.
Paul Forno, do you, being kind of from the implementers and the integrators perspective, what do you see the key benefits are, and where do you see your clients focusing the most on why they're doing it, and how are they going about it, developing the experience?
Yeah, so Sean covered a lot. I'm gonna highlight a couple of things, right? So why the omni-channel experience? Number one thing, it's for growth, right? Understanding how you're going to grow. And an important point to understand about this omni-channel experience is that it doesn't mean it's important to understand that you're driving that digital awareness, right? So it doesn't, each channel may not actually be the channel that you acquire on, but it's influencing that action and that product influence. And so a lot of times people get mixed up and are like, okay, how am I going to buy on each of these things? Instead of thinking about, who am I trying to reach? How does each of these channels act in part of that acquisition as part of that learning about the product, wanting the product, using the product, all of those different things that will then influence that purchase. And so that's a piece of some of the strategy work before we get to even the platforms, is thinking about for that particular segment and product, all those influence points that will maximize so that you can then, at their favorite channel, then to buy.
So in other words, Paul, if I understand that right, they may have favorite channels to shop, but they may have other favorite channels to compare, and then they may have other favorite channels to transact. And you shouldn't assume all your channels are just about transaction. They could be complementing each other to drive that experience, depending on how the consumer wants to look at how they go through their buying experience. Did I get that right?
Yeah, if you look, we do yearly primary research on this, and we've seen the overall retail, 58% of all purchases are influenced digitally, regardless of what channel they buy it in. So that's really part of what you're trying to achieve, not just to transact, but to influence your brand, right? There's going to be certain, like TikTok's a great product discovery, right? Platform now for a huge segment of the product. It doesn't mean necessarily, they're going to, click a button and buy right on there, but it's going to definitely influence them to buy down the road. And so really thinking about your marketing mix and how you're trying to get to your customer, that's really part of the strategy when you're thinking the why for omni-channel experiences.
That's good stuff. Paul Drecksler, any other thoughts around why develop and the key benefits you see from, maybe a small business standpoint?
I think they nailed the benefits. I think the only thing I would add to the conversation is just that when exploring omni-channel, I think there's a difference between being everywhere and being everywhere that your customers are. And the latter is a little bit more focused than the former. And I see some brands, and it's certainly questionable what they're doing on certain platforms. And you wonder if they're just going after the let's be everywhere versus let's dive deeper into the everywhere that our customers are, or that our demographics are seeing. So that's all I would really add. I do see the benefit, obviously, of being in multiple places, but I think it's really easy to, whether you're a large company or a small company, I think it's extremely easy to spread yourself too thin across multiple channels. And that's true today, and that was true 10 years ago when there were less channels as well.
Got it. The thing I was thinking about in question two a little bit here is how much I see the trends going on in B2B that are very similar to what's happening in B2C. And I think B2C is leading and teaching B2B how to think this way, right? And it's fascinating to me, even in our own business, to watch how we're going more and more channels and how we're having to think about what is that experience like across our own channels when we go to market across all these different channels. So I think it's very interesting how B2B is starting to think about these issues very similar to how the B2C market has been looking at them for a while. Let's go to question 3. I've got here, what are the top challenges you see in delivering effective omni-channel experiences, and especially as far as like people and processes and technology? And I thought I'd kick this one off myself by talking a little bit about, and I got a feeling Paul Forno, I definitely know, has some opinions on this, the challenges of how you organize as a company in your channels and how you motivate others to work across channels is a key issue. And then obviously, how do you integrate the data so the data is shared properly across those channels? And how do you integrate applications like, not just e-commerce, but marketing and CRM and your analytics systems and things like that? So I think the challenges that a lot of people look at, and I think Paul Drecksler talked about this a little bit, is how do you prioritize that? And how do you approach that? That seems to be one of the biggest channels, because it can be almost overwhelming sometimes to look at all the potential channels that you could go after and market, but you only have a limited amount of resources, and some of those channels will be more effective than others. Let's start with Paul Forno. Thoughts around the challenges you see with your clients around trying to execute the omni-channel development and experiences?
Yeah, when you think about the clients that we're dealing with, large enterprise companies, you're talking about hundreds and sometimes thousands of people that work at the company. So trying to that change management of how to work. Traditionally, they've been very siloed approach, right? So retailers in store, and you probably all had this experience. You go to return, you bought something online, you go into the store and you want to return it, and they're like, sorry, you got to send it back via the process online, and you get very frustrated. And so the reason people do that, it's not because they don't want to help, it's because, and you go back many times, it's around incentives, right? So retailers sometimes had broken out their e-commerce operations separately from their core retail, and weren't motivated or weren't incentivized to work with the e-commerce area. So part of what you also need to look like is you need an omni-channel strategy for your people and your org, right? You also have to put the customer at the center and figure out ways that you're all aligned well to how you want to best connect with the customer. And if you got that aligned, then you can solve the complex issues that are out there anyways on especially from e-commerce, from the high cost of returns, et cetera, and trying to solve for all of those other issues.
Makes sense. Paul Drecksler, any thoughts you have about what are the key challenges you see talking to the companies you work with?
Yeah, it's interesting to hear Paul talk about challenges from larger retailers, because I'm coming at it from the opposite perspective, dealing with smaller businesses. There's definitely overlap between the challenges, but the biggest one that I've dealt with is the internal resources, the people within the organization finding the time to prioritize not only the channels, but also thinking about the customer experience as they go through that channel. And I'll just use a small example of a brand I work with. They started out strictly as wholesaling to brick and mortar retailers in the US and Canada, built a very successful business, realized that they were leaving money on the table just from the simple fact of folks within stores were Google searching their brand, because maybe they would find a product, a pair, a shirt or a sweater that they didn't have the size. So they would immediately go to the internet and see if they could buy the size that they wanted online. So that was the catalyst to go online. Then once you go online, suddenly Pandora's box is open, and you see all the different potential channels, all the places you could be selling, all the things you could be doing in each channel. But even though this company, is multi-million-dollar company in terms of revenue, it's very surprising the very small team that runs the whole show behind the scenes. And so I think a lot of companies are in the same position. Very small team doing a lot of work. And so it's hard to prioritize and shift to channels that are new, that haven't proven themselves yet, when they're already behind on their daily tasks in terms of focusing on the work that goes into the channel that already is successful. So that's what I've found to be the biggest challenge with smaller companies, is just finding the time to prioritize it. And that bleeds into process as well. It's one thing to have the ideas, it's another thing to implement them, but finding time to step away from the daily grind of work, to think about things big picture and say, hey, this process that we're running with a skeleton crew right now, let's reinvent the wheel. Let's take what's working and let's disrupt the whole thing so that we can make it work a little bit better. That's a very big ask for small businesses. And the last thing I wanted to touch on was with the tech side of it. A lot of these smaller businesses have been playing catch up for the past decade with larger retailers. They've spent a small fortune getting to the point where they're at. Only, honestly, by the time they get there, they're already a little bit behind. And so it's difficult to say, hey, all this tech that we pieced together, because remember, a lot of these API connections and all this stuff that we take advantage of 2022, 2023, this stuff wasn't as fluid a decade ago, 6 years ago even. And so it's like they've worked so hard to get to the point where all these things are working. They've had multiple developers come in to fix the previous developers' work. And so the idea of breaking that and starting from scratch, or even not even breaking it and rebuilding, but just touching it and adding a new channel, it's scary, and they don't necessarily have the time to bite it off. So what I see happen is it becomes, we want to, but we've got to prioritize this, and the goalpost just keeps getting pushed farther and farther down.
Got it. That's good, Paul. Sean, you have an interesting viewpoint from a technology vendor and a process standpoint. What are your thoughts around the challenges you see when you deal with clients on this?
Yeah, I'll introduce a new well, I'm sure we're all aware of the concept, but to the conversation. So we were talking customer service and how do you facilitate that in the omnichannel world? How do you operationalize to make sure that the customer stays at the center for, say, a returns case or something along those lines? And now what we're looking at is like, as a big challenge is how do you make that mobile centric? So the customer, like as 10 years ago, you had to wait for the customer maybe to get home before they started to interact with the brand again from an online perspective. Now they can just do it right. If they're in a bricks and mortar store, they'll just do it right at the counter because they have their device with them. Same on the other side from a shopping perspective. You can do that comparative shopping and interact with different touch points with the brand from a mobile perspective, but they can leave the store, do a lap around the mall, and return to the store and make a purchase decision because they were being compelled to do so from their mobile device, like all at the same time. And so that's a new challenge, a new layer to introduce into the equation, is that you can curate the omnichannel approach. Is it mobile friendly? Is it mobile first? Because now that's where we're starting to see the customer journey starting or having heavy interactions on that path to purchase is taking place in the mobile environment. So that's one other challenge and one other thing to consider.
Okay, so we're on question 4. What recommendations do you have for those considering that are in the process of building and or considering moving down the omnichannel experience? What have you learned, right, talking to others, and what do you think is critical as people approach omnichannel to think about? Paul Drecksler, do you want to lead, maybe kick off this part of number 4 question?
Yeah, absolutely. Because what I want to talk about here is as a starting point, I think that folks get wrapped up in the technology, and that's a rabbit hole. And once you start going down, it's hard to look back and step out. And so rather than start there with looking at your tech, I like to say start with thinking just about the customer experience aside from the tech. Like, how do we make our various channels better in regards to sales, our loyalty program, returns, exchanges, and so on? Because a lot of companies, they get hung up on the logistics of everything having to work seamlessly behind the scenes. But in reality, customers don't really care if it's a seamless process as long as we can do the things that we want to do. And I just want to give you 2 examples of that. Let's say your in-store POS system is not set up to handle online returns. So does that mean that as a brand or retailer, like, sorry, we don't accept online returns, you've got to leave and ship it? No way. Just work with your staff. Like Sean was talking about a second ago, everyone's got their phone in their hand. They probably bought it from their phone. So even if I can't accept the return in the store and process it through my system, help the customer in the store pull out their phone, return the item, or open the website on the store computer, help them return the item, and then take it from them and ship it for them. So there's a lot of ways that you could offer the experience of being omnichannel long before your tech behind the scenes is actually functioning in the most ideal setting. One more small example, talking about loyalty programs and rewards programs working across channels. Yeah, that's the dream world. That's the ideal world. But if that can't happen, test the demand for it at first. So for example, you've got the rewards program running on your website. Add verbiage to your print receipt in the store that says, if you'd like to add these points to your rewards, email us. You can start to gauge demand for the different levels of omni-channel experience that your customers actually want. And you might find at the end of the day that you don't necessarily need to automate every part of it with your tech stack. You just need to have the process in place with your staff and your employees to be able to put customers first. Instead of looking at each sale, each return, each transaction as like, we need to maximize this, look at it as we need to hold on to our customers, do whatever it takes to make them happy, provide the service that they need to get the experience that they want. And then later we'll start to look at the demand in each channel and figure out how our tech stack can automate a lot of the things that we've got people doing. That's what I would say as a starting point, is just to forget about the tech and just thinking about the customers.
So Sean, any thoughts around, I'm sure you don't want everybody to just forget about the Shopify tech, but any thoughts around recommendations about how to approach this complex issue in a way that makes sense to what Paul was talking about, which is thinking through the customer experience of how to add the technology in a way that doesn't become overwhelming to the organization or to the consumers of the merchants' technology or brands and things like that.
Yeah. I think Paul touched on this earlier, but prioritization is key here. So when you're developing your omni-channel strategy, maybe it's not the best strategy to be everywhere all at once, like in every possible channel. It's probably better to understand your customer, understand how they might interact with the brand, potentially how they're influenced by maybe the competitive environment and how they're shopping based on that customer profile, and then prioritizing your build out to put your limited time and resources towards that the channels that make sense. And in the last 3 or 4 years, we've seen like a big broadening of the available channels. We've seen things evolve in a way in the different ways you can interact with your customers or your potential customers, and not necessarily for just a purchase decision, but like Paul Forno said, in how you get your customer to just recognize the brand for the first time. So TikTok, you can create a lot of influence and awareness, but that's probably not the checkout. So as you're trying to understand your customer's potential journey and what channels they might interact with, you want to prioritize something that's realistic for your business and how you can operationalize it and what makes sense to invest in based on the customers that shop with you or the customers that you want to attract. So that's the big recommendation. And that extends into, say, if we're talking Shopify, there is a lot of optionality built into the platform in where you can spend your time and your capital, and that even goes to internationalization and what does that mean for the business if you're looking to do that. And so prioritization is probably the big call out I have.
Paul Forno, any thoughts you have coming from the Deloitte perspective? What recommendations do you guys usually have with your clients as they go into the omni-channel journey, if you will?
I think one of the challenges is that everybody wants to do everything and you get a lot of voices. And so it's important to have like a segmented strategy that you can always go back to, right? For different segments, there's going to be different priorities and different rules. And so for you to be successful, instead of trying to go through the noise, if you have to have that segmented strategy and what's important, and then you can check your tactics versus that, right? If you don't have that, then it's a laissez-faire. You're going to just throw stuff at the wall and hope it works. But if you can't go back to kind of core personas and those segments that are important and how you will optimize for them, that will help you get through all of the push-pull of, this product line wants this tool and that product line wants a different one, right? You need a way to, have everybody go towards the same goal.
Got it. So classic, get your strategies, objectives, and goals in order before you go out and get the opinions of the different departments and channels, because otherwise you can get pulled in a lot of different directions and maybe not make that much progress. I think we call it Commerce 360 at Jitterbit. and how do you eat the elephant, right? And I think the issue is if you guys, what I'm hearing is if you can prioritize and get it clear on how you're going to go attack that, and then get feedback on how to optimize it, that's going to probably be much better approach than trying to do it bottoms up. And you got a lot of different opinions and a lot of different goals kind of driving how you're going to attack it, which could be difficult to execute on then. Did I get that right? Sound right?
Yep.
All right. So what I think I'll do now is looks like we've got about a few minutes left. I'm going to turn it back over to David.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Open up the channels to the audience and see if we have any more questions that
Yeah.
maybe has for the team, but for the panel here.
Yeah, we have a couple, and a lot of that last question I think kind of stirred people's sort of ideas. So I'm just going to ask this to the panel. We're trying to clean up our tech stack. What is the best way to do that? And what do we have to do to get to that omni-channel place by cleaning up our tech stack?
Sean, do you have any thoughts on that, or Paul DeForno?
Go ahead, Sean.
I'd probably need to look at the actual situation, so understand what the tech stack is. There's a lot happening today in an omni-channel environment. Like you have fulfillment, logistics, PIM, inventory management system. I talked about mobile centric before, customer service solutions. So you can actually apply, customer service AI now, the AI word, into the tech stack, and then how are you integrating all of that efficiently so that it actually talks together? So, it's I guess investigating and consulting with the right people, honestly, to understand what your business needs are, and then understanding what's in place and what should be removed or added. So. We'd have to look at the exact scenario, but it's kind of what I'd recommend.
Great.
Paul DeForno or Paul Drecksler, any thoughts on that?
Sure. I guess, first of all, like many times when people are looking at all the tech stacks, and they'll think that the new tech stack is the silver bullet, right? And many times it's not the silver bullet, right? There's other challenges, right? As much as we're great Shopify partners, et cetera, it's not a magic bullet. But if you are genuinely looking at, tech stacks, I think a lot of, in fact, there's a new alliance that's gotten out there, and you're seeing it a lot more in the enterprise side called Mach Alliance, MACH.org. And it's a great way of prioritizing, working with companies that are, microservices based, API based, cloud first, and headless. So all of these, so that you can work and stitch together all these solutions that are consistent with much more of a opportunity. And I think that's just the future. And I know Shopify is in the midst of discussing that, but they're definitely aligned with those ideas.
Yeah, I can tell you from our perspective, one of the nice things about our platform is that you can modernize APIs from legacy systems, right? So you can help them participate as if they're a modern system, while, let's say, you're migrating off of one of your legacy systems onto Shopify over a year or two. You may be able to use your legacy systems as you're transitioning to the more modern system. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity there, to your point, Paul, about putting modern APIs in front of legacy systems to help the company transition. It doesn't have to wait for everything modern to be in place to start to integrate across channels and things like that. Paul Drecksler, any other thoughts on that question?
Yeah, just from a small business perspective, there's oftentimes a lot less development and customization that goes on, and it's more the process of piecing various softwares, out-of-box softwares together that already coordinate with one another, that already talk to each other. And so I'm actually doing this right now with a client. They're starting from scratch, which is always fun because they've got nothing that they're tied to in terms of their technology. And so what it comes down to is, how do I get everything that they want to do in the easiest way possible using software that already works with one another? And so it really just comes down to prioritizing the software, the software that has the most requirements or specifications. So for example, if your affiliate program has very specific needs, or your rewards program has very specific needs, kind of start backwards and pick the softwares that fit those very specific needs. Because then as you start to work backwards, you say, okay, well, now I need an email marketing software. Now I need an SMS provider. All those integrate with one another. So while a lot might be riding on which affiliate program you use because you need it to do certain things, your email program might be less important. So that's the advice I would give if you're on the smaller end of the business spectrum, and saying, we've got to make, instead of doing customizations and developing our own custom APIs, we just want to work with things that already speak to one another. Work backwards, start with the things you definitely need, and then fill in the gaps on the other, say, smaller softwares from there.
Got it. Okay. David, are there any other questions?
Yeah, let's do one more. Returns are our biggest challenge online and in-store. Will it get easier, or are the applications already out there?
Thoughts from the group on returns specifically?
Well, our platform allows for omni-channel returns, so I guess it depends on the commerce tool that you're using on the front end, but
yeah, there's a lot of great tools out there, and more than the tools, it's also thinking about how to minimize that, right? One, how do you show fitment ahead of the time so that people have a better understanding of the product before ordering, so you're minimizing having to do the return. Looking for other ways of reducing that in loyalty schemes. I know there's great tools out there like Loop Returns, that, again, another Shopify partner that looks for incentives to minimize it, or how to change the return process into kind of a promotional or a great experience, right? And so that could be a whole show unto itself, right? Just talking about returns.
Paul Drecksler, any thoughts on returns?
Yeah, for sure. I was going to say that could be a whole show as well, because I think one of the surveys I just posted in the newsletter a few weeks ago was, what's your favorite return channel? And this was in response to Target launching their new drive-up returns. And so now you don't even have to go into the store. Through the app, you can process the return, let them know you've arrived, and someone comes out to your car to take it. That's awesome. So it's like there's a number of channels out there. If you're a smaller business, you can partner with Happy Returns and let people have drop-off locations. I mean, so the channels of returns are growing and growing, but at the end of the day, it's still just a very expensive thing. And so tools aside, there's no shortage of methods. But I think the biggest challenge I've seen with companies is just how do we build this into our process? And how do we build the cost into our business? And I don't mind being the one to say it, that consumer expectations in regards to returns has just gotten really, really, really big. And all of us, we're on one side of the company, but we're still customers on the other side. And I think that we personally probably have really high expectations for returns. And so the challenge becomes, on top of everything else we talked about today, how do I satisfy those expectations? And frankly, depending on the size of your operation, or the size of your products, or the cost of shipping, and all that jazz, you might not be able to get there 100%, unfortunately. It's a challenge for sure.
Got it. David, any other thoughts here?
No, I think we are good. I just want to thank everybody for joining us today. Ron, amazing job as usual, being our host. Sean from Shopify, thank you so much for joining us. Paul from Deloitte Digital, and Paul Drecksler from Shopifreaks. And thank you everyone out there for joining us. Have a great afternoon, evening, or morning, wherever you are. Be on the lookout for a survey when this closes out, and then also a recording of this webinar so you can enjoy it again. Thank you, everyone. Have a good one.
Thanks, you.
Guys. Cheers.
Thank you.